Vice Chairperson Anjali Ma'am, Academic Consultant Mrs. Shalini Sinha, dear teachers and fellow students. Today, we have with us an ingenious personality, Mr. Uday Arya, who has not only taken out valuable time from his busy schedule, but also has been so considerate to enlighten today's youth about different aspects of history. Let's welcome him.
Today I wanted to bring a subject of great interest to me, which is history and Greece's debt to India. But I'd like to just go over a brief intro. I characterize myself as a seeker, an aspirant of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. This is just some formal stuff, so you have some background. The more interesting stuff is this, which is me when I was approximately your age, maybe a few years older. And going to school in foreign lands, trying to learn new things, and spent some time in France. That's eventually moving back. It's with my knee chair, moving back to India in 2017, and yeah, that's me with my class of history students. I used to teach critical thinking as well at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry. And so the class sizes were very different. This is about 14, 15 students would be considered a large class. That's a very brief intro, so you get some background. But I want to begin with this question, which is why study history at all? Arguments against. There are plenty of very strong arguments you can make against the study of history, and if you make them well enough, you can convince your school teachers and your principal to say, let's say bye-bye to our history class because we don't really need it. Good examples. Here's one. Okay, factual info is useless. We have Wiki and Google. Strong argument number one. Anyone disagree with this strong argument? All right, we have one hand. Come on, there has to be more hands than just one. Only one person. That would be a contrarian view. There has to be some other. I would think that would be much stronger. Here's one more. We supposedly learn from the lessons of history. How many times have you heard this one? We learn from the lessons of history. You heard this? Yes? They say, another famous one, history repeats itself. Right? But supposedly, and we have to ask this question, do we really learn lessons from history? And a skeptical person, I would imagine many of you are skeptics, would point to that picture on the right and say, all lies, all lies. Third point, anyone agree with this? It is not used in daily life. It is better to focus on science and technology. Yes, we have some hands for that. We have many hands. I appreciate. There's a lot of honesty in this room. Excellent. Well, I get it. These are strong arguments. And here's a fourth one. This is a little bit more complex, which is a problem of perspectives. What does that mean? You have multiple interpretations. Whose history? Whose point of view are you actually thinking about and articulating or reading? So, the version of history that you're familiar with or you are familiar with as a young adult might vary substantially from somebody else's in some other part of the world. And there is no universal history. And then you might say, in chemistry, an equation is an equation. But in history, you're telling me my story is different than your story. That's a little frustrating. I spend a lot of time reading about all this stuff, and you're telling me what I'm reading is quite irrelevant and perhaps even wrong. And your perspective is more important than mine, or stronger than mine, or probably better based on fact than mine, whatever fact means. So it's very, very subjective, and then you might be stuck with this problem of, I don't know what is true. Supposedly, after studying history, you're getting to the truth of something which matters to you, but what if you don't have that access? So here's a thought experiment, and I'm going to be asking a series of questions with you, starting with this. What would it be like to live in a society where very little value was placed on recording or preserving knowledge of the past? So this is a thought experiment. You have to try and imagine what it would be like. Right now, we're in a very different age, right? With our phones, we are recording like pretty much everything. I'll be honest, I'm recording every moment of my daughter's growing up, like literally every moment. I'm shameless. I just keep taking any small relatively or distantly cute thing, I'm like, yeah, I want to take a picture of this. But imagine a different age where you have to do the painting stuff, right? So your daughter or your son's doing something cute, you'll be like, am I really going to make a painting on this? It's okay, move on. Imagine an age where you don't have access to these recording tools. We have fantastic access to recording tools today, right? So what would it be like? It's question one, keep that in your mind. The related question is this: would it matter? Would you have no history if you don't have a recording? And related part two is, what really would be lost? Would you lose something if you don't have a recording? Well, here is another famously articulated phrase, lacking accounts of the struggles and achievements of our predecessors. This is now said with great gravity in the voice. You do not appreciate the struggles of our predecessors. You do not appreciate enough how much struggle they went through. Then context is, so how do you make sense of the present? How do you make sense of the present or orient our quest for new knowledge? Okay, this is actually a hard one. Can you think of anything that you know that does not depend in some way on what you or other people knew before you? So think about this for just 10 seconds. Close your eyes if it helps. Concentrate on this question. Is there anything at all? I like this little table which points out to, I'm not sure you can see this red dot from back there, but this is this past area. Stuff that was not lost or not recorded makes it here. These are surviving artifacts used to create history. This stuff is actually used to create history. So we're in the present now, right? So let's think about the present. This is the argument that the last question made on the previous slide, which is that everything we know is because of something we knew in the past. But need supposedly this to make sense. Supposedly, and I'm not making this claim very strongly, but let's hold that. We need this. Think about this in the context of disease. You heard of a disease that starts with the letter A? Yes? Oops. So a disease that affects your memory is brutal on that family. Brutal. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. 10 points. But it's brutal in a very, very painful way. Why is it so painful? This person who was living next to you for 60-ish something years now has almost no memory whatsoever of who you are. Zero memory. You're starting from scratch. Every day she greets you and she says, why are you in the house? And this might be somebody who you have poured your heart out to. All the love in the world. Person does not know you at all. Zero. You show her a picture of this memory, she's like, I don't know who this is. So it's painful, and that's why when you ask this question, if this happens to a country, what happens? Individualizing, you feel the pain of not knowing who a certain individual is or a person is or their set of shared experiences. You hold lives full of shared experiences. Those experiences disappear like this when you have this disease. Imagine a collective memory failure at the level of a nation. What might that cause you or your people? Now it's not just you anymore, it's you, your family, your group, your larger clan, etc. So it's still a question. Would you agree that all knowledge is in some sense historical knowledge? Yes, no, cancel. Some people saying yes. And you don't have to agree. Yes? Okay. Okay. In fact, one could also make this argument that all these fields are rich with historical knowledge and in fact are defined by their historical knowledge and evolution. Right? Every one of these. When you say politics, I'm going to study politics, when you begin your study of politics, you go back in time. You're not looking at who is chief minister of so and so state today and saying, now I know something about politics. You have to know, okay, what is the structure of politics? How did we get to where we are? What are we aiming for? Typically, all the study is historical in nature. So it's not just history of civilizations or countries, but also every single human field of curiosity in a way is tied to this. But we'll go more and ask some more questions. So this is a cartoon. It says, son, history is important because it's the story of our past that we rewrite to understand our present. Okay? And there's a lot of comedy in this, and countries and nations do this all the time. They rewrite the past. But we'll come to that in a different context. So here is this question, is it possible? And this, sometimes history classes start with this question, right? Is it possible? And you have to ask yourself this question from first principles. Is it possible to have knowledge of the past? And if you do make that claim, then you have to substantiate it. How is it possible to know? I asked my mom, where did we go when we were 8 years old? I don't know. If there are pictures to prove it, it's there. If there are no pictures, it's gone. It's just completely gone. So at a collective level, to ask and answer this affirmatively, to make this claim very strongly, of course it is possible to know the history of the past very, very, very clearly, well, then you have to go back and ask how do you know? And in some context you'll say, but we have archaeological evidence. Okay, archaeological evidence is only extent to this much. Or then we say, we have literary evidence. Okay, we have literary evidence, but again, it's only a tiny, tiny subset of what existed. There's even evidence to suggest that what we know is tiny in comparison to what is out there. This is a question about the quality or kind of knowledge that history is typically bringing to us, if at all. Is it different than other kinds of knowledge? And if so, how? So this might be a question worth jotting down in your many questions worth jotting down, but think about this question and ask yourself this question. This is not a question for a textbook, but you think about this. And is certainty about the past more difficult to attain than certainty about the present or the future? This is boiling down to another great arrogant view of humanity today, just because we have massive access to technology, that we can know the present. Anyone remember this Malaysian Airlines flight that went disappearing just a few years ago? Oh yes, what happened to it? It disappeared is all we know. Okay, some fragments here and there, but what actually happened to it in this day of fantastic GPS, most advanced that technology? A plane was flying over the earth and it just disappears, and nobody really has a clue even today. Magic show. So what counts as a fact in history? And how do you know it's a fact? When you're making the claim that this is factual, very factual, I saw it in Wikipedia, therefore it's a fact. Or I saw it somewhere else, my history textbook says it, therefore it is a fact. This guy, the French poet, he has a nice way of portraying this problem. He says we enter the future backwards. What? We enter the future backwards? He says, like a man rowing a boat that floats on the tide, we enter the future facing the past. Our eyes see only the landscape of the past. What tomorrow looks like, nobody knows. It's an interesting way of thinking about it. And this is another claim, that without that backward gaze, we forfeit an understanding of how we got here. We surrender the opportunity to empathize with our forebears and understand their perspectives. This is in fact the cartoon that goes with this. You're entering the future in this direction, right? And you're entering the future facing the past. And there is some truth to this, I would argue. But think about what this means in the context of your own distant study of history. Why would this be of any help? Coming back to that original question, why study history at all? This is sometimes being posited as an application, because nothing has really any use unless it can be applied. So we'll ask this question: what are the possible applications of historical knowledge? One, generating predictions. Oh, history has great predictive power, they say. Okay. And then the other one, which is it gives us insights to make transformative interventions in the present or the future. What's more realistic? What is the idea of generating a prediction from history? What can you think of any example of generating a prediction from history?
Sir, this is mostly used in weather forecasting and all. We check the history of the weather forecast which we have already taken out in the past, and we try to generate prediction if that phenomena which have already occurred in the past will occur again or not.
Okay. So it's a probabilistic model. There's some probability attached. Okay, something happened in the past. Is it likely to happen in the present or the future? Some probability. And this is also a question that I think is interesting. Since we're talking about predictions, are there other disciplines than history that are better suited to predict the human future? For example, you can think about economics. Economics is one such field, but there are other fields which can give you much better predictive power. Any guesses? A big one.
Science is a better discipline to predict the future because, for example, we know that when we pour H2SO4 on Fe, it reacts. So in a similar way, there can be bigger and better examples to predict the greater human future. For example, we know that a virus spreads pretty quickly, and what are the consequences of that. So on seeing the structure of a particular newly found virus, we can say that this will spread extremely fast or extremely slow, and this will last for this much time.
Sure. No, thank you. Appreciate. And in fact, that relates to the point about technology. Right? It's the technology of the cell, it's the technology of viruses, biotechnology. But more broadly speaking, today's modern world will make the argument that technology is a way stronger and important driver of this understanding and predictive power for the future. So, this is one argument. This is not a claim that's made very strongly, but look at point C over here. Is history also how things ought to be? How things were, are, to some extent, how things will be, ought to be. Does history give a sense or answer any questions along these lines ever? You've been studying history for a number of years already, right? So think about this. Does history answer questions ever about how things will be or ought to be? What's your view? Does it look into the future ever? Nope. Anyone says it does? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So here's another book which came out a few years ago. This may be one of the differences between youth and age, he says. When we are young, we invent different futures for ourselves. When we are old, we invent different pasts for others. Ouch. And I believe this was also made into a book, into a movie, sorry. But also think about this, right? Inventing different pasts for others is actually a national pastime of many history departments. When you have power in your hands, you can decide the future of other countries by deciding their past. It's very clever. All you have to do is to tell a different story. No. You don't quite know your own history. I will tell you your history. In fact, here is the right history. You will rinse, copy paste enough. Books will be published, and therefore you have a certain idea. A country has a certain idea of its history, and by the way, you'll have innumerable nations in Africa today that will tell you how much they have been wronged by a certain alien idea of history that was superimposed on them, because power is in the hands of the person who actually writes that book. And these young children in different countries of Africa read, "This is my history," and now in today's modern progressive world there is some re-questioning of these ideas. Who decides to say this is what my past was? So this is the point. We invent different pasts for others, and we ask again. This is a frequently used idea. History is written by the victors. Okay. Of course, the stronger question is it disproportionately written by the victors in any country? And if so, what does that even mean? Victors implies, by the way, that this is also a very binary worldview. There are victors and then there are losers. So it's a very, that George Bush type thing, you're either with us or against us. It's very binary. So there's no shade of nuance possible. You will always be either this side or that side. And it's complex, right? If you study the Mahabharata, these sorts of questions that are themselves complex. Okay. When they have, and is what they have written deliberately false? So when you say, okay, the victors have written history, does it mean that, or by and large, that they've actually messed up and done something deliberately in a wrong way? So another narrative that goes into the shaping of how we perceive progress is this, right? Since t is equal to 0, there are various graphs that go around, right? So have things gotten better, which means they go up like this, or worse? And this is an interesting question you can ask your parents and your grandparents if you have access to them. Ask them, have things gotten better or worse? And just leave it at that. Do not be specific. Don't be overly articulate in this. Just leave it as, since you were around, have things gotten better or worse? And see the contrast of answers. Here is a cyclical view of that. So this is not linear anymore, just better or just worse. So there's a lot of variation. And here's another version, which is nothing much has really happened. And if you ask this question genuinely, you have to ask this question about what is this things that we talk about. When we say things have gotten better, what is things? Are we talking about GDP? Are we talking about internet connectivity, phones? That's it? Is that our benchmark? Do we have some other metrics? Can we even measure those metrics? What has gotten better? Suppose we chart this, right? This is GDP. Ooh, it's pretty extraordinary. So now you ask this question, how would we know what to measure as a benchmark for progress or decline? Economically, this looks like it's fantastic. And you might have an answer, but good luck getting other people to agree with it with you, because your friends may have a different benchmark, may have a different way of looking at that same very metric. So here is, I'm just going to briefly put this fellow in front of you. He's a very popular fellow. His name is Toynbee. And he wrote a whole series, like he published all those fat volumes of history. And it's called A Study of History. And more than 7,000 pages. And his characterization was this, okay, rise and fall of civilizations. So after reading, I don't know how much, he put together 7,000 pages. So this is his lifetime's work. And he has this idea, there's a development phase of a civilization, there's a growth phase, a breakdown phase, and a disintegration phase. This is just his model. And in fact, he says this. He formulated these laws of history. So I'm going to just ignore all four and all three and just focus on the fourth one. The fourth law of history, according to Toynbee, is this: spiritual achievement and material achievement are antithetical. So after his several volumes of history, I want to ask you this question: do you agree, yes or no? Fourth point. Antithetical is opposite, right? So do you agree on this point? Spiritual achievement and material achievement are antithetical. So whenever a nation has very high spiritual achievement, it will have very low material, and vice versa. Very high material, very low spiritual. Yes? Agreement. Any disagreement? Disagreement. One more disagreement. How many disagreements to this? Raise your hands up, okay? Many disagreements, okay? So we know why there is a good, healthy disagreement to this point. So I'm going to show you this, this point that by and large what happened to him is a bit of a tragedy. So Toynbee did all this wonderful work. I'm not saying it's fantastic, I'm just saying he put in a lot of effort. Okay, he sincere worker. He tried to work a lot to create some models of history, spent a lot of time studying, puts together these volumes, and then ends up being ignored by the world. World doesn't care. Oh, why did that happen? So apparently historians say Toynbee favored myths, allegories and religion over factual data. This is one claim. And here's another interesting point about what happened to this gentleman. Toynbee's ideas faded both in academia and the media, and they're seldom being cited. His style of civilizational analysis faced skepticism from mainstream historians who thought it put an undue emphasis on the divine, which led to his academic reputation declining, though for a time Toynbee's study remained popular outside academia. Interesting. So one guy in history studies who actually acknowledges the possibility of something called the divine ends up being ignored by mainstream historians because, hey, the divine is just whatever. It's just, how can it, I mean, come on, this is, we're doing serious stuff now. Okay, serious stuff, you can't have divine and all that stuff, right? But in a way, in the context of India, this is hilarious, if not tragic, because the divine is central to our knowledge of the world, and to ignore it so completely is also bizarre. But that's interesting what happens to this fellow. Look at this last part. Toynbee ventured to see a divine plan behind the rise and fall of civilization and discovered a kind of progress in spiritual terms, resulting in, quote, a cumulative increase in the means of grace at man's disposal. Looks like this fellow was actually on to something interesting, something profound. But that is the nature of ideas. It grows and moves over time. History, people lost interest in history for a long time in the 70s and 80s until this fellow came around, Samuel Huntington. Huntington is this Harvard-based author who published this very, you could say, seminal book. After reading this book, Hajar people started studying history again. They're like, yeah, this is good stuff. I like it. Fantastic storyteller. Huntington's position was this, right? That you would have, after the end of the Cold War, you would have a multipolar one of competing major civilizations divided by fault lines. So this was his civilizational divide. So he, after reading the whole grand book, I'm saving a bit of a trouble now just for the purpose of time. So he says this is how the world's sort of getting divided up. And he says this is going to be a very, very strong fault line across civilizations. And it has major implications for national security, idea of identity, etc. And it was very provocatively written. So Huntington also said this: the West won the world not by the superiority of its ideas or values. Oh wait, let me just pause there for you. Even today, the West, which is America and Europe, still feel very strongly that we are fundamentally superior to you, Asians, these differently colored races, a little bit. We're just superior to you because we have always had better ideas than you, and we have thought a lot more than you. It's just out there. It's just, so he says, ideas or values. Also, when you look at stuff that happens in India, they say, your values are fundamentally lower than our values. Don't even compare. So Huntington was actually original in his thinking, and he makes this point that the West won the world not by the superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but rather by its superiority in applying organized violence. Ouch. Westerners often forget this fact. Non-Westerners never do. Non-Westerners never forget. And in fact, to this point, Sri Aurobindo says in an aphorism, when Asiatics massacre, it is an atrocity. Massive news go, atrocity, atrocious. When Europeans, they call it a military exigency. It's very refined, it had to be done. This has to be done in a very precise way. So he says, ending this, appreciate the distinction and ponder over this world's virtues. Very fine. This was written, by the way, 100 years ago. Right? 100 years ago, it's about how perception matters. Right? Here's in fact what in a different realm. So Toynbee more in the academic realm. This fellow Huntington also more in the academic realm, but it also started becoming more mainstream. But there's a sci-fi writer, some of you may have heard of him, Isaac Asimov. Anyone heard of Asimov? Yes, no? Some hands are going up. So very popular sci-fi writer, and he had these Foundation series. Okay, so Foundations 1, 2 and 3, and in fact Apple, trying to become a content company, decided to create a whole series based on Foundation. And I'm not sure if it will play, but you can check out the trailer later. But the point is this, right? They are concerned with the preservation of their culture. In this entire collapse of this galaxy, the one thing that matters, and they recognize, we have to preserve in some way our way of life. And that leads to the question, pray, what is our way of life? What is our way of life? So Foundation series is very interesting from that point of view. Today as well, you might ask this question, right? If you think about a country that implodes and has to somehow preserve something essential about its life and aim and purpose, what might it preserve? What is so central to it that is actually worth preserving? You don't need monuments, right? It's not about the physical, it's not about the exterior, it's about something that's inside, most essential. What might be that most essential thing that is worth taking on and preserving in the evolution of humanity for that particular country, because every country has its unique soul, its unique expression. So what might be worth preserving? So this series, Foundation, actually explores that in one sense. So it's interesting to me. If it's interesting to you, do look it up. So here's the ambassador point of view. At some point, this is a whole bunch of European boys and girls, probably college age. And the question that I'm going to ask you is, what if you were situated amongst them? And then comes the one Indian amongst all these Europeans or Americans, the one Indian. Okay, so diversity of color, you're the one brown skin. Okay, I'm brown, you're brown, we're all brown skin, right? So one brown skin amongst non-brown skin, and suddenly this question of color matters. Suddenly, now here nobody cares really, whatever, we're the same. But then you will be the one special person. Oh, you're Indian, okay, curry. So this comes into you. India is a cool country, very cool country. It's got the Taj Mahal, but I can't really visit India. I'm too sensitive. Okay, it's too much poverty, slums, sick people. It's unhygienic. Dirty roads and garbage, cows, caste system. Minorities live in fear. And then the last part is the worst. You guys eat with your bare hands. Yuck! Like, why would you do that? So, when you have a popular perception that defines a country, popular perception. By the way, I'm not making this up. I've actually experienced some of this. Okay, some people when I was living in France could not imagine coming to India. Could not imagine. They'll rather go to some other parts of France or some other, French territories, just as an example, because it is just this sensitivity point. Cannot do. I don't know how you do it, dude. They'll actually ask me this question. I don't know how you put up with this. I mean, all this stuff we're talking about, how do you deal with this stuff? So I don't know. It's perfectly fine to me. It's like life. It's normal. Okay, but I'll be pierced like this. If I see poverty on the streets, I'll sink in like this. And it's I can't do. So I'll rather not come. So here is this stuff that I would come to, right? Where do I come from? This is why study history at all. Where do I really come from? No, really come from. What do I inherit? Okay, we're all inheritors. Like we're all inheritors of a bunch of different things. And as an ambassador, how would you do? How would you do in that group of largely differently colored individuals, all well-meaning, by the way, well-meaning, they're not bad people. Nobody's making the claim that anybody is bad. It's all well-meaning people who may not really have any genuine understanding of India. If you become that ambassador to India, which you inevitably will if you are having dinner with them or lunch with them or just hanging out at some adda with them in college campus or school campus somewhere, university campus, you will be that representative to India. No one's going to say, I congratulate you, you are now ambassador to India. But you are ambassador to India. And you will have to be talking about your country, your inheritance, your everything, identity, in some way that makes sense to these individuals. And also remember this, humans always try to fit in, which means we seek acceptance, which means by and large, and this is true of all people, right? Everybody seeks acceptance. But what happens largely because of the heavy impress of colonialism on India, right? Sri Aurobindo says the British perhaps overstayed. But because of that huge weight of colonialism, we tend to be a bit more eager, shall I say, to seek acceptance. So if we are not particularly well informed, or if we are not particularly clear on our own heritage, then we end up becoming what I would say is that coconut on the right, which is a person who is brown on the outside like all of us are and white on the inside. Brown on the outside, white on the inside. And you actually don't have to look too far for this, because all of the TV serials or majority of TV serials that you are familiar with amongst friends, including Friends, is coming from Sri Hollywood, right? So you will know much more about that culture than they will know about yours. So by default you will be much more eager to be like them. Yes, can I? Yes. You will keep extending yourself, your identity, to get that acceptance. I want to be more like you, I want you to like me. And by default that extension transfers to, you're beating up India, I will also beat up India with you because I want to be a part of your group. Okay, I want acceptance. I'm cool, I can criticize, I can criticize. And the pain in this should sort of start to emerge, which is it okay to criticize your mother? Think about this in broad sense. Your mother, in a group setting, imagine the joke or how painful that might be in a fundamental sense. To do this in a private setting alone is terrible, but in a group setting it lacks some sort of internal discernment of who it is you are criticizing. And do we know enough about her, the divine, the mother, the Mahashakti? Do we know enough? Do we feel enough? Are we wide enough to actually do this criticism? But it happens. And that's the reason I'm actually mentioning this in front of you, because by and large, if you actually situate yourself as an ambassador, that compromise is very easy to make, because the general human tendency is to want to seek acceptance. So why study history at all? This may be one of the strongest arguments to make, so as to not be a coconut, right? It would be a good thing to not be a coconut because it matters, and because every single pinpoint of these stories and ideas about your heritage make it to the stories of other people's shared experiences. So when the others around the world understand India, they don't just understand through media articles or books about India, but they understand through every single point contact through Indian civilization that they have, which is you. So your culture actually shines through you, your sense of self, your identity shines through you as an individual to them, and therefore that light is worth something. So think about that as a parting thought. So this guy says, my feeling is that living matter carries in itself a hitherto undefined principle, a tendency for perfecting itself. It may be that life owes its origin to this self-perfecting principle. And what's interesting is this guy is a scientist. A scientist is making this point that life owes its origin to the self-perfecting principle, which anybody even remotely familiar with the idea of evolution in the Indian context knows well that this is actually the divine constantly evolving and manifesting itself. It's a brilliant insight by a materialist. This guy has no idea about, these non-scientific realms, or he is purely looking at it from a very, very different sense, but he has come to this term, self-perfecting principle. So this is one way of looking at history. It's the story of the inner and outer evolution of human consciousness and life, moving towards a glorious future perfection. And that may be also the point about studying it, if it has any value or worth. It's a story, and not everybody is going to be interested in the story, right? Why would everybody be interested in the story of the inner and outer evolution of human consciousness and life? Some people would find it very interesting. I find it interesting, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. But the interesting part also is this, moving towards a glorious future perfection. And perfection might be that one word which is worth meditating upon. Why is humanity evolving, if it is indeed evolving? Past development, present progress, future evolution. And there's a lot of work to do. And in fact, that brings to the parting questions on Harappa, which is, why did it flourish? Why did it begin in the first place? And if it was so fantastic, why did it have to decline and perish? And what were the sources of vitality and endurance of a civilization? Right? And if you look at Greece momentarily, right, they had one golden age. Greece is like the mother country of all of European civilization, and their entire history, so to speak, is focused in just one epoch, which is like 4 centuries, not even. So in 4 centuries, all that Greece accomplished as a great country sort of ends, and there's nothing really material after that. So in stark contrast, you might ask, in India you had many golden ages. Why is it that one country has many and one country has one? And Greece succumbed, and it's now when people go to Greece, it's actually not a living culture. Very interesting point. When people visit India, it is a living culture. All of us are exemplars of that living culture. But when you go to Greece, all that you see or read about Greek civilization and stuff, it's not there anymore. There are Greek individuals, yes, but Greek civilization as we know it from the past is all tata bye bye. It's just not there anymore. But in India it's very different. We were impeded, that's the word that Sri Aurobindo uses, temporarily by barbarian invasions, but we survived. And how? How did we survive? Yeah, we can ask. Let's start with that. Well, let's start with how did we survive, or why did we survive? How did we survive and why did we survive? Let's open it up. Who's got the first hand up for why did we survive?
So basically what happened that all the invasions came from the northeast and northwest. So all the invasions were that affected only, mostly they affected North India, and the culture in South India was mostly preserved. So
Okay.
that's why it survived, and North India was also, a lot of it survived also.
Okay. I'll build on that. Thank you for that.
So my perspective, why did we survive and how, is like many of the invaders, why did they come to India and other nations? Why they do invade to other countries? They come for money, they come for slaves, etc. They just come for their wealth purpose. But we Indians had some sort of power of unity. We united, and each and every time after every invasion, we recovered, we re-established our culture, and again they just got jealous. How did they recover so fast? Many countries think, how did we looted them 1,000 years back, now they are again at our same level. How? They
Yeah.
again looted, we again recovered. That's the reason. Unity is the word I would use for this answer.
Okay.
That we were united in each and every time.
Okay, thank you.
We survived, I think, because our culture, our beliefs, our the way we perceive things has been embedded in children, in people from young ages in India specifically, because our beliefs are really different from what is there around the world. We believe in internal growth more than external growth, which is many a times prioritized. So I believe that when you were discussing why should we study history at all, you said that there's for the study of history, the complete set of books written by the person, he was not accepted because he believed more on oral and religions and myths than on recorded facts. I think when we stick to what we have, when we stick to our religion, when we stick to our culture, when we stick to our belief, that is the reason why we can survive through this great work of evolution.
Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
So another reason which can be given for why we survived is probably the fact that whoever invaded India, it was either for the resources or the humans as a whole. For example, Ghazni invaded India 17 times. He came for the loot. Or the Britishers, on the other hand, they came for the spices and the human resources. So, it is not that anyone really wanted to kill Indians. They knew we were smart in some ways, and henceforth they wanted to use us at the end of the day.
Okay. What other questions might come to mind from what we just discussed? Anything that leaps out from your notes or your observations or your comments? Anything that is worth, yeah?
So my parents teach me that we should do puja. So at that time also the people would have taught their children about the puja and the culture. So the word was Ru. Ru was all clear about the culture. So how many invasions took place? The Ru was all clear about the culture. That's why we survived and we are continued till now also.
Sir, I have another point of view about that question.
Yeah.
I've recently read a book about attitude by which has certain articles by the mother and Sri Aurobindo, and I think why we survived is because we like to connect to what is within us rather than what is outside of us. And in that particular article which I'm talking about is like highlights the point that we understand what is happening inside us to get connected to what is happening outside us. We cannot be connected to what is happening outside us in a proper way until and unless we know who we are. So we survived because we know who we are and we are proud of it, and we feel a very strong feeling of being a part of a family, of a society which has similar beliefs, and we fit in here.
Okay. Oh, good. I want to ask a related question, which is when we talk about survival, right? It's not just the survival of ideas, the idea of something essential to us, but physical survival also matters. To survive, the body has to survive, right? So in this context, there were periods where the power of the idea in India was so strong that it actually created a substantial challenge for the civilization to actually survive. And one such idea is that the world is largely false, or it's an illusion, right? And there was a very strong philosophical support for this idea in India. We just talked about ideas. Ideas have power. So which philosophical idea or system comes to mind to you which supports or supported that point of view back in the day, which had a large impact, but the system which says life is largely false?
In the religion Jainism, there's this line quoted that the main belief or the main belief on which the entire religion is based on states that the entire life, all the materials are false, and everything has life in it, and I think that is a point which relates and links.
Okay. Anyone wants to build on that? She said Jainism. Any other terms come to mind?
Now someone says that Jainism, it means conquering. Since the Jainism word comes from the word Jain, which means conquering. And the people who practice Jainism are called Jains, which means they have conquered their own desires. This is what comes to mind.
True, very true. The question broadens out to what might be the idea, and we just talked about the power of the idea that world is largely false. If the world is largely false, suppose that is true, and you have an invader coming in, a large set of invaders coming in from wherever, west of India, east of India. Let's suppose you have a large set of invaders coming in. What might be your natural course of action?
Marianjan from class 9B. So the first reaction of the people, if the invaders are invading us, we'll defend ourselves.
No. But the question is, think carefully on this. The philosophy is telling you, that life is largely false. Life is largely an illusion. So what might be the natural course of action if largely society believes that the world is just false, it's not really.
So they'll simply give away their things and all to the invaders.
Okay, just pause on that. How many others, can you just repeat that last sentence again?
So they'll simply give away their things which they have.
Okay, so if you heard him, how many others might actually agree with his assessment? Just raise by a show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What about the rest? Basically, you do not agree with that assessment. Do I take that to be true? Can I take up one person who is willing to take the opposite view from what he said? Just one person who takes the opposite view.
He said that we would give up.
Yeah.
Why would we give up? We have the instinct of fight or flee. We would first of all like to retreat from the position, from danger, trying to hide, save ourselves, save our belongings, everything which we want to save and do not want them to perish, and then would try to regain the stronghold which we had before the invasion took place.
Okay. Now this is the challenge with a problem of perspectives, right? If I might give the mic back to him, please. So can you build on what you were saying a little bit more? They will potentially walk away, you were saying, right? Can you build a little bit more on that?
No, as you said, the idea is that the world is an illusion. So we should not believe in the worldly affairs. So if I'm I like this book, so this connects me to a worldly affair. So if we do not want to connect with the worldly affairs and all with the materials, so why should we save our things from the invader if we don't want to connect to result in a worldly affair and again in the cycle of the most so-called cycle of rebirth, birth and so on.
So this is actually a very central point. Thank you so much. That's actually a central thing that he's just said. And I want you to reflect a little bit more about this, because he's taking something as a logical consequence of a belief system. A belief system in India, which by the way was largely prevalent, is that the world is largely false. It's an illusion. The world is an illusion. Now, it is super hard for you today to believe that. We are in a different time and age. It's hard for me to believe that. How can you possibly believe that the world is largely false? It seems bizarre, it might even seem stupid. But here's the challenge of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and trying to actually imagine what it might be like to them about the world if it was very strongly held that the world is largely false. The world is largely false. Why save anything? Why bother? Example is, that a certain belief system tells you, and this is, by the way, affecting the population of, I think it's about 1.5, right? 1.5 billion, 1.5 billion people around the world share that belief system. That's a very large number. We're not talking about a state, a small tiny number. This is a very, very large number of individuals around the world who share the belief system that he just espoused to you. The point is that ideas have power, right? Ideas have very strong power and affect how humanity lives or chooses to live. And that leads to that prior question, which is, if you believe that the world is largely false, why would you bother saving it? It's largely false anyway. And in fact, if you have the best minds and capable individuals of a certain era or time who believe in this system, then you have not many people left when you actually have invasions, right? Today, you have a certain army force which gets very, very committed individuals, because now there is no belief in pacifism. There is a belief in strong defense of the country, and you and I are part of that belief system. In a certain different era, the world was largely false. The illusion was a very, very strong part of the Buddhistic idea, and another idea by the name of Shankara. Anyone heard of Shankara in this world, in this group here? Adi Shankaracharya, yes, no? Yes? So, Adi Shankara also had a strong support to this Buddhist idea. So, between Buddha and Shankara, you have a very powerful force which actually affects and molds the mind of the nation. Right? These are towering personalities in India who are shaping cultural worldview of Indians at that time. And they're telling you something very different from what you know today. Right? They're telling you something fundamentally different from what we know and perceive today, which is that the world is largely false. And if you so have it, and if a large number of the best men and women of a certain era believe that, then if you have invaders coming in, the best people supposedly around in India at the time are sitting in monasteries. You're sitting in a monastery and you're sitting and doing Om, because your belief system tells you that the world is false anyway. It's okay, huh? It's okay. Everything is fine. Jagat mithya, Om. It's everything. Another bad word, translation, popular translation of that term, Jagat mithya. So this has an effect. Ideas have power, and that's why I was coming back. And ideas have power even in today's time. What he just articulated about what is believed in Islam today is affecting 1.5 billion people. So every belief system that we carry or think about, in a sense, you have to question for our time as well, because ideas have power. So thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Uday Arya is the founding partner of Blue Lotus Ventures. He returned to India in 2017 after 14 years in New York and Paris, working in various capacities of investment banking. His principal areas of formal expertise are structured finance, risk management, and value investing. He taught for 5 years in the Sri Aurobindo Ashrama in Pondicherry. We would like to thank him and extend our sincere gratitude to the exuberant personality, Mr. Uday Arya. From how to make sense of the present, of the past, to how to link them both. From questions that have made our mind linger for knowledge, to tell us on how our history makes all of us who we are today and who we can be tomorrow. He has made us view history from the eyes of historians. We would once again like to extend our sincere gratitude to you, sir, and to our very own Ma'am Anjali Jaipuria for providing us with endless opportunities to grow towards knowledge from ignorance. Thank you.